Hi everybody. Wow, it's been a long time, right, since I've published a video on my YouTube channel, and the reason is of course that I'm now quite busy with my Patreon subscriptions and making videos on very interesting topics, amongst which one is zodiacal releasing, the scenario zodiacal releasing from spirit. And one of my patrons asked me a question which I want to address here because it's a very important principle having to do with the delineation of the Lot of the Daimon. So let's have a look. So this was the question asked. Hello Martin, thank you for sharing your insights on the Daimon with us. I recently joined Patreon and I'm catching up with the videos. And I have a question. You talked about the signification of the bound of the domicile master of the Lot of the Daimon, but what about the bound where the lot itself is located? In which way can it contribute to our delineation of the lot? And I want to address this question. Before I do that, I want to refer you to one of my previous videos that can be found on my YouTube channel, the ones where you can find this video, of course. And that is the one on the 7 hermetic lots, of which I will repeat some small part having to do with the principles that need to be addressed when answering this question. So let's have a look at that. So thank you for this question, Tom, and it's an important one because it has a lot to do with how we need to address specific things in a natal chart, and especially the ones I'm referring to now, which have to do with the part having to do with Tuge, fortune. So let's have a look at that specifically. So the answer to your question has to do with the principle of having to do where the lots are actually active, and that has a lot to do with how we can address them and how we can interpret them. So this has to do with this stuff that I presented on Plato, which can be found in the presentation that I referred you to with the previous slide. Of course, Plato talks about the upward and the downward path, and that's very important in understanding what lots are and how they function and where they function in our lives. So Schmidt conceptualized them as residing, the lots, in the region of coming to be and passing away, which is the lower level of the emanation principle, so to speak. So they were sort of the trickling down of planetary effluvia from the realm into the realm of Tuge, and that's the world at large, of course. So it can be symbolized like this. The specific things of the planets are sort of trickling down, flowing down, coming from above, and they are somehow not exactly coincidental with the theos principle of each planet. So it's trickling down into the world of coming to be and passing away. So let's have a closer look at the principles at work there, so you can understand where planets and especially the lots are active and how they are active in our lives. Now, I've talked about these principles many times in many of my videos that you can find on the YouTube channel where this is also published, but let me simply repeat everything about this theory, and it helped me a lot in trying to understand the differences between how to interpret things in the natal chart and the things having to do with lots. So the descent, the path downward, results in a three-tier part model for astrological principles and how they can be understood. So the first one is of course the highest level. The second part is where the archetypes land in your natal chart, so to speak, and the third level is where they are entwined and put in sort of a context, and that context has to do with the life around us, the world in general. So when we talk about the highest level, we are talking about the zodiac, and when you talk about the descent of the zodiac, then you see that the images become topical places. So as said, the principles having to do with the higher realms of the zodiac, and later we will see it has to do with the planets as well, sort of gets put in a certain context. So I always use the example of my rising image, which is the crab in my case. So the crab on the first level has all sorts of associations and all sorts of principles that are represented by the image of the crab. But in my natal chart, the crab is a representative of the first place. So the universal principles having to do with Cancer, with the crab, actually have to be reinterpreted as seen that the crab is sort of limited in all its expressions because it has a task now. It has the task of representing my first place. So it has to do with vita, corpus, and genium, right? So the crab loses some of its higher principles, and now it gets a job, right? So that's the principle of the zodiac moving one step down in this three-tier model, and then the images become topical places, the houses as they are now called. And one of the interesting questions Schmidt always asks is, when do signs give signs? And signs is, of course, the use of the word for the images, the 12 zodiacal images, that is no longer used by him, simply because the word sign does not really express the deeper meaning of what the zodiac, the images of the zodiac, the 12 images, actually represent. So, but the intriguing question, of course, is, when do signs give signs? When and what is a sign? And his answer was, well, or my answer is, the signs give signs when they become places, because then they represent something and they refer to something very specific in your life. But there's also a third tier, a third level underneath the natal chart idea, and that is the principle having to do with the third tier, and I will get into that. Because at the second level, you can say that the fate of the zodiac is that they become 12 topical places. And the principle of fate concept is that they are sort of putting constraints. They are no longer free to do what they want, but they need to address some specific issues, so they get a certain task, right? Okay, so one step down, the images become the 12 fortune places, the 12 fortune houses. Again, a very interesting concept, and that has to do with the planets as well, because at the highest level the planets are the gods. Of course, they are numinous and they have all sorts of whimsical things that they can do and all sort of freedom to act, but this stops when they they are in an image and they become a part of a natal chart, because then the planets are the staff of the images, because the domicile ruler, the exaltation ruler, the confines and the bounds have specific tasks with relations to the image that they are part of. So they are no longer free to do whatever they like, but they are put in confines. They are, so to speak, the servants, the personnel of certain images. So that's an interesting one as well. So the fate of every planet is that it is positioned in some place, it is positioned there and not somewhere else, it's under testimony of this and that planet, not another one, etc. And that's all the fate principles, all things befalling the planets by being located in a natal chart, and that also confines and restricts whatever a planet can do in a natal chart. So that's the first way down, and again, a very interesting idea of what fate represents, right? Okay. And of course, Valens said the planets are servants of Haimarmene, and Haimarmene is actually the realm of the natal chart, because there are certain principles promised, there are certain things that are your due, represented by the planets being in certain images and being in certain places, and that is how they function in your life, and that's sort of what's given to you, that's your due. Right, which is a very interesting fate concept. Sorry. And one level down, the planets become, for instance, the 7 hermetic lots, which are represented and spoken of by Schmidt and other astrologers as the daimones, the daimons of planets. So And the third level is where things also happen independently of your own actions and intentions. You can say that the second level is what's your due, and that also has to do with your intentions and your pursuits in life, etc., etc. It has to do with who you are and what you want to become and what you're striving for. But this is the place where things simply happen. That's the world around us, right? So that's a very important principle having to do with this third tier in life. And we also, of course, have the fortune houses, counting images from the Lot of Fortune. And the Lot of Fortune is, of course, a paradigmatical lot in the Hellenistic astrology. So that's an important realization to understand where each principle is functioning. Is it functioning on the highest level, and then you're simply talking about the archetypes, and you might even use mythology to try to understand what are the zodiacs and what are the gods. But in the natal chart you need to understand how these planets function and what the zodiac represents. And then at the third level, that's actually simply the world around you. So you are born, you are incarnated in your natal chart, but you're also thrown into the world, right? And the throwing into the world is this third place where things simply happen independently of your own actions and independently of your own intentions. And that is where these lots are functioning, right? So Schmidt said that the planets then become the daimones on this level, this third level. They are no longer the god, they are no longer the theoi, they are the powers, also called the virtues of the planet, but then operative in the world. So this is the world of coming to be and passing away. And for instance, I'm thinking about how to call it, herbology, where you associate certain plants and their healing powers with certain planets, with certain gods, so to speak, but that is not the god itself. It's simply a power of virtue of that planet, of that specific planet, as embodied by a specific plant having specific remedial capacities. So that's what this signifies, and that's the level where the daimons, the lots, the Arabic parts as they are now called, where they are functioning. So, and that has a lot to do with how we need to interpret them and how we can address them. This model is very interesting because it has a special relation to, for instance, the two lights, of which the moon is the most important one, because the Lot of Fortune is a very important principle of this Hellenistic astrology, because that is actually the reason why this astrology was developed, coming to grips with the world of coming to be and passing away, which is the third level in this model. So when you look at the moon as the universal principle, the archetype, then you can say that the moon is actually the mother, the goddess. Why is that? Because the sun's light is given birth to manifestation. So the moon is, of course, representative, for instance, of the body and the vitality that resides in it. And the vitality has something to do with Helios, the sun, and the moon is, of course, the recipient of that vitality, and therefore she represents, for instance, the body, and also all sorts of other associations with the moon as the universal archetypal principle has to do with the manifestation coming to be and passing away. And for instance, in Plato's Timaeus, it is called the Hora. It's the place where things come to be. It's sort of something that needs to be informed by something else, in this case the sun, before it can manifest something. And what it manifests is something that the light of the Helios, the sun, brings to it. But this principle of an impulse and then being embodied in something is typical of course, the universal principle of the moon. When we come to the second tier, then we're talking about the mother as a physical body wherein you exist. So it has to do with your body, but of course it literally has to do with your mother, who carried you for around 9 months before you were born. So things happening. So this is the very interesting way in which the universal principle of the moon is represented by the heavenly body of the moon herself, and then has to do with everything that we associate as an astrologer with the moon in the natal chart. And the interesting thing is that in the lower part of this three-tier model, then we are talking about a lot of fortune, and then we are talking about the mother as the matrix wherein you exist, which is the world around you. And it's that was referred to, I believe, by Plato as the cosmic body. So there you have it again in the symbolism. The symbolism can be very much appreciated when you use the three-tier level in trying to understand what all these things have to do with one another. And as you can see, it's a very logical principle actually to talk about these principles in the chart and also in astrology as a model in general. We can apply the same principle to, of course, Helios, the sun, which at the highest level, of course, represents Father in the sense of God, the all-seeing creator of everything, so to speak. And Valens has a very interesting quotation that I give here to make a comparison, just as in the universal rotation, the all-seeing sun, whirling in its tireless course, galloping through a time of immense eons, leads the dance of the stars in their varied courses back to the same place, then separates them once again. The sun causes their tropics, think tropical, the tropics, literally, their seasons and their phases, starting where it stopped and stopping where it started. Likewise, the sun charms and arouses the souls of men and becomes a cause of rank and occupation and of all success. I'm not quite sure how that follows from the previous remark, but it's an interesting one. So when looking at the second level, the first step downwards as the daimon, the father, then you have the father as an impulse, as a stimulus from the inside, something that awakens you from the inside to take action, to lead you into action, to lead your life, etc. And that's one of the, of course, the very important principles and significations of the word daimon, something that leads you, that speaks to you, and that guides you in a certain direction. And when we come to the third level, that's of course Father as an impulse from outside in the world. It's then an inspiration, and that's what the Lot of the Daimon represents. So again, the Father is the inspiration from above. On the second level, it's the Father as a principle of an impulse from inside yourself. And at the third level, the Father is an impulse from the outside, saying, act on this. So that's the three-tier idea behind the significations of the Helios, the sun. Now we all know that there is a very important threesome going on in delineation in natal charts, which has to do with Helios the sun, the moon, and also the ascendant. But in this model, you can say that it's about the Helios the sun, it's about Selene the moon, and it's about fortune, because fortune represents the yoke, the binding of sun and the moon together, and then representing the world as such. But the interesting thing is also that in the ancient astrology, these three levels have their own model, so to speak. So, for instance, the highest level, the first principle of this three-tier model has to do with the zodiac, and that starts with Aries, right? And there we have the principle of the solar signification of the 12 images, because the sun gains in strength when it's spring, which is the Aries period, and it reaches its height at the northern hemisphere in the image of the crab, where it reaches its highest point above Earth, and then it's summer here, and then slowly the sun starts waning, and then you come to the 7th place, which is in this case the scales, Libra, where the sun of course loses its dominance because it's now moving to the southern hemisphere when we're talking about the northern hemisphere. And then at the lowest point for the sun is where its light is weakest, is in the 4th place in this case, which has to do with Capricorn, where of course we celebrate Christmas, which is the festivities having to do with the return of the light. It's perhaps not about the Son of God, but the Son of God. That's an interesting one. And at the second level we have the Thema Mundi, which starts with the crab, and the crab is of course the domicile of the moon herself. And that's very interesting. But at the third level there starts a new series of houses, starting with the image where fortune is. And the interesting thing is that there is no general model for this level, as this is very different for every individual chart, because depending on your natal chart, the lot of fortune can be in any of the 12 places in your chart, but there's no general model of it, be it simply that fortune herself is the model for this level. So that has to do with where fortune falls in your chart by chance. That's not random because it's dependent on the sun-moon relation, but yet it lands somewhere in your natal chart, right? And that's the start of the fortune places. So that's the third level again. So let me tell you something about the origin of the principles having to do with the lot of spirit, the lot of the daimon. And when you start top down, you have to start with, of course, Helios the sun, because the lot of daimon is, of course, the lot having to do with the principles of Helios the sun. So in principle, Helios the sun is this issue. It's representative of dawn, spring, and what happens is that nature awakens and comes to life. And you could say that dealing with the lot of daimon, the lot of the sun, and sort of, you can say that this is a philosophical component of what we're trying to get to with this lot of daimon. So the second one is Helios the sun in your chart. So you could say that when on the philosophical level the sun is that what awakens nature, you could say that the sun in your own chart is the things that awaken you from the inside, or you could say the things that bring you to life, what inspires you to act or to do something, and you could say that that is the inner component. So there is a principle out there which is Helios the sun, and what happens when the dawn breaks, everything awakens and comes to life, and we step out of bed and we go to work, right? We start our daily jobs and our daily issues. In the natal chart, the sun as a symbol, the symbol of the of Helios the sun, is that what awakens you from the inside, or something in you awakens you to act on something. So that inspires you to do something, or inspires you to get into action. And now we get to the lot of the diamond spirit. You could say, as I said in the previous slide, that the lots have to do with things coming down to earth, placed in the environment of the native, and that has to do with something that is around you from the outer world. So you could say that what awakens you in the outside world, what brings you to life, what inspires you, what stimulates you to action, coming from the outside. So we have a philosophical component, the sun. We have a inner component, which is the glyph of the sun in your natal chart, where the sun lands in your chart, so to speak. And then you have also the trickling down effect of the sun via its lot of daimon, the lot of the sun related to your everyday environment, because it's calculated from the ascendant, and of course the ascendant represents you as the native. And then you could say that that is the outer external component. So this goes, the red numbers 1, 2, 3, that's the, let's say, the inner component, but the black circle is the conceptual circle, 1, 2, 3. But when you start with the lot of the daimon itself, then you could say that it's the reverse order, because we get motivated by things in the outer world. Also, they go together, of course. And when that is the case, when you are inspired by something, and you always hear this in everybody's biography of people having very important experiences, that they encountered something, they saw something, they heard something, and that awoke them to some inner quest for realization of something that they wanted to take action on, wanted to do with their life. So that is the principle of the Lot of the Daimon. So that happens, of course. We get inspired by things that awakens us from the inside, and then you come to the final phase, which is actually Helios, the sun, as a principle, something coming to life, something inspires you to move on, and that is sort of an idea of making sense of your life. It could also be very spiritual, of course. So this is the perhaps the hermeneutic circle of the principles having to do with the Lot of a Daimon. So that's at the core of what I will be presenting in this Patreon tract. Now, with all this, I come to the interpretation of what do we do with this Lot of the Daimon, and is it our task to also delineate everything that has to do with the location of the daimon with regards to the image where it's in. So the domicile master, the bound ruler, the lord of the exaltation perhaps, etc., etc. So when we conceptualize the location of the lots as being the principles at work in the world around you, with which you simply have to deal, then the daimon is everything in the outer world that inspires action. So, as I said, that is sort of the effluvia, the trickling down of the principles of the sun and the moon combined in a very specific way, which is expressed in the lot calculation formula. So, the lord of the daimon, that's its task, is how you handle these inspirations that inspire you, and not the daimon itself. Simply, the daimon is simply pointing to what is the principle that inspires you, but it does not need to be addressed in the sense of there's an exaltation lord of the daimon, the Lot of Daimon, there's a bound ruler of the Lot of the Daimon, because it stands to reason that the lots are not delineated in a manner like natal chart factors, because it is something outside, so to speak. So the lots are in the world around you, and you do not delineate the things around you by means of the principles having to do with your soul as such. For instance, the bound ruler has to do with the principles by which you evaluate whether or not something you are doing or something that is in your life is addressed in a certain manner. The canon, as was explained in other videos, for that specific principle. You do not do that with the daimon itself. You do not do that with lots. You simply need to address the lord of each individual lot, simply because it reflects something that is pointing towards something in the outer world having to do with perhaps a person or a specific situation. So for that reason, the lots, all of them perhaps, which I will address in my next slide, are simply indicators. They are pointers, and then the Lord is the one answering the question of how you deal with that specific topic. Therefore, you delineate the Lord, and you can use everything in your natal chart to evaluate that, but you do not delineate the lot itself in a certain manner, because if you would do so, I have this example. For instance, suppose you are headed to New York, but the road sign that points you in the right direction is badly damaged. And for that, you would not conclude that New York is a really bad place to go to. If you would conclude that, then you confuse the condition of the road sign with the thing that it points to itself. So that's the explanation for why you need not address for instance, the bound ruler of the Lot of the Daimon itself. That's my conclusion about how these specific things ought to function when you use this three-tier model for understanding what the specific principles in the natal chart are actually addressing. So that's the answer to the question. You do not delineate, for instance, the bound lord of the daimon itself, as far as I'm aware of. And it would be a bit silly, because then you would have perhaps a different conclusion about what it all signifies in your life, and you simply address the lord of a specific lot to understand how you would do this action. For when you're talking about a lot of the daimon, then the lord of the daimon has to do with how you react to the impulse to act on things. When you're talking about a lot of fortune, then the lord of the lot of fortune simply says how you deal with things in general befalling you, how you encounter them and how you react to them, and that you can address by means of all the things that we are used to in delineating natal charts. But you do not do that for these specific lots themselves. But there's more speculation of mine to address this, so let's have a look at that. So everything that I said in the previous talk about this topic so far has to do with the hermetic lots, which are specifically pointing into a specific direction having to do with things that might befall you. For instance, there is a lot of nemesis, which is the Saturnine lot, which has to do actually with situations that are pretty hopeless and desperate. And then the domicile master of the lot of nemesis simply says how you normally react to these situations. The lot of courage, which is of course the Aries and Mars lot, has to do with things that you would normally never do, which are challenging and also perhaps frightening to you. So in my case, I would never pick up a spider because I fear spiders. So when I so the lord of the lot of courage has to do with how you deal with situations that are actually a bit frightening or intimidating. That's how you handle them. That has to do with the lord of the specific lot. Now, in this example, I'm talking about a very specific lot, but merely as an example. For instance, the father. So there is a lot of the father, and you could say, as I've shown in the previous slides, the principle of father has to do with the son. That's one of the principles, the father-like, so to speak. And I believe there's also Saturn that might function as one of them. But let's take the sun as an example. Then, of course, you have the working in the soul. So then you have the sun representing the principle of the father in your soul. But there's also a father in the world, your specific father, your dad, right? Your father in real life, and that's the lot of the father. So by days, that's the ascendant plus Saturn, Kronos, minus Helios, the sun, and by night it's the reverse, the ascendant plus Helios, the sun, minus Kronos, Saturn. The point I want to make, and that's my speculation, there are many things said about these lots, how you can use them and how they should be used in for instance, in horary charts or in your natal chart. But I think this is a very interesting principle, because it might suggest that the location of the lot of the father has perhaps less to do with the principle that he represents to you, but the lord of this diamond, of this lot of the father, might suggest how you normally deal with deal with your dad. So that's something different than sometimes the very extensive delineations of the lots that are presented in all sorts of literature. But this might be the principle that helps you understand how you can address the topic that is represented by a specific lot. So there are all sorts of lots for specific people, formulated for the mother, for brothers, the elder brother, for sisters, etc. And it might be that the planet that is the domicile master of that specific lot tells you a lot about how you deal with these persons in your life, because they are in your surroundings, right? So that's a way to address the things around you. and that has perhaps less to do with the workings in the soul, but this is actually something that you it might be a habit of sort, because you of course are surrounded by specific people, as the father and the mother from early day on in your life, and there might be a habitual way of how you dealt with father and mother, and it might be very interesting to investigate this, to try to understand that this is perhaps not the way you experienced your mother or your father, but simply the way you dealt with who they were in your life and what role they had in your life, and you acquainted themselves with them in your life. And one thing that is I find very important is, and interesting, is that in the formulation, when things are said about how to calculate, for instance, the lot of this and that person or this or that situation, where the lot is located, that is called the place of that person. And place is, of course, a referral to a certain house, as we now call it in modern astrology. So that's interesting. So indeed, we have the cosmic places, which are simply the 12 zodiacal images. Then we have the principles working in your soul, and then we also have these persons and these situations around you in the world around you. And perhaps this might be an interesting way to investigate how specific things going on in your life having to do with persons and how they are represented in your life might have to do with how you deal with them. And that is, of course, then the domicile master of the specific lot that I'm talking about. Okay, so with this I come to the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it's perhaps some food for thought. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again soon.